In this one, we're going to discuss metabolic pathways. So we're now on to the sixth key area of human cells. So what do we mean by a metabolic pathway? Well, what they are a series of integrated chemical reactions, each of which are controlled or catalysed by a unique enzyme. So there are thousands of different examples of metabolic pathways constantly taking place inside of the cell. So you can see from the diagram we have our starting substrate. It's converted into substrate 2 by an enzyme, 2 into 3 by yet another enzyme, and so on and so forth until we get to our end product. So if we look a little closer at these reactions, we get some details about some of the symbols and more information on the reactions themselves. So we can see that there are different steps, different things going on here. So we could have reversible steps, which are shown by these double arrows. So A can be converted to B and vice versa, B back into A. Or steps can be irreversible. So once B has been converted into C, that's it, there's no going in the opposite direction. But we can also have something known as an alternative route, so an alternative way, an alternative chemical that can be used to get us still to our end product. So you want an example of all of these steps in a real metabolic pathway. Here we've got glycolysis, which will be a subject of a video in its own right, but it has all of these key features. So the first stage is an irreversible step. There's just a single arrow showing you that once glucose has been converted to intermediate 1, that's it, it's committed to the pathway. Whereas between intermediate 1 and intermediate 2, we have our reverse arrows. So this is a reversible reaction. It also has an alternative route. It has sorbitol, which can bypass all these steps to still produce pyruvate. Okay. Another way we can classify reactions and metabolic pathways is to describe them as being anabolic or catabolic. So anabolic reactions are ones where we build large molecules from smaller ones, and this requires energy, whereas catabolic are where we break down the large molecules into the smaller ones in order to release energy. And what we often find is these two reaction types go hand in hand. First, we do a catabolic reaction to break things down into their smaller building blocks and release the energy we need to then build smaller things up into larger biomolecules that our body requires. So let's move on to the past paper questions. So in this one, the following diagram shows an enzyme-controlled metabolic pathway, and you're asked if enzyme 2 is inhibited or stopped at time X, which graph predicts the resulting concentrations of compound Q and compound R. Okay. Pause the video and come up with your answer. So this is very typical of your metabolic pathway questions, where you're being asked to apply your knowledge to this new scenario. So what we can do is use what we know about metabolic pathways to think through logically what would happen if we were missing a certain enzyme or a certain compound, etc. So in this case, we imagine we've got no enzyme 2, so we have to think, okay, what will happen to Q and what will happen to R? Okay? So if no enzyme 2, that means compound Q is not being converted into R, so we would expect the concentration then of R to decrease. So that leaves A and C as our only two viable options. Now that we've narrowed it down to 50-50, next one to look at is Q. Okay? So if Q is not being converted into R, but we've still got enzyme number 1. What we would expect is therefore its concentration to start increasing. Okay, we're still doing this first reaction, okay, but nothing has been changed or happening to Q, so eventually it's going to accumulate into in the cell. So the answer has to be C. Let's try another one. This time we've got a specific metabolic pathway. So even though you might not have discussed this or used the names of these chemicals, that's not important. Don't let any of these complicated chemical names put you off. It's about using your knowledge of these pathways. So this time we're told phenylketonuria or PKU is an example of a genetic disorder which affects the following metabolic pathway. So we've got amino acid phenylalanine being converted into amino acid tyrosine, both dietary proteins, and eventually we get to our end product, melanin. So you are asked to use the metabolic pathway above to suggest 1. Why PKU results in a build-up of phenylalanine, and 2. Why individuals with PKU can still produce melanin. So use that metabolic pathway and answer the questions below. So let's take a look at the marking schemes. So for part 1, why phenylalanine builds up. Well, that's all to do with the fact that we cannot break it down or convert it into the tyrosine. Okay. Or we can say enzyme 1 doesn't work, it doesn't break down the phenylalanine, and thus leads to the production of tyrosine. Okay. It allowed you to accept it for phenylalanine, but not transferred for broken down. Okay. So we can break down phenylalanine. It means it's going to build up to toxic levels. So part 2, why can you still get tyrosine or still make melanin? It's because you can still get tyrosine from their diet. Okay, we're told that these are both dietary proteins, which means that both can still be consumed. As long as you still consume tyrosine, the rest of the pathway can continue, as it's only enzyme 1 that is affected. So I hope this has helped you understand metabolic pathways a little bit better, but please let me know if you still have any questions or anything you're not sure about.